But Dr. Gerard Lyons joins me. Thank you very much. You're a strategic partner, I believe, and shareholder with Net Wealth these days, a leading voice on economic matters. Before I bring you in, Gerard, let's just see what Jeremy Hunt said earlier this week about tax cuts. He appeared to rule them out when he gave his speech at Bloomberg. Let's just hear his words.
The biggest and quickest tax cut that the Prime Minister and I can deliver for families up and down the country is to halve inflation. That is eating away at people's pay packets, their spending power. It's pushing up the price of the weekly shop. And that is something we can deliver quickly and will help everyone. We are committed, as I made very clear, to a low tax economy. And the difference between Conservatives and Labour is that we cut taxes when we can, they never do. And that's because we recognise that a low tax economy is one of the vital ingredients for dynamism, entrepreneurialism, to encourage people to take risks, and that's why we want to do it when the time is right.
So that was Jeremy Hunt speaking on Friday at Bloomberg HQ, ruling out tax cuts, even though the Tory membership, Tory voters and the wider electorate, having seen this squeeze on their finances, are desperate for taxes to be cut. What's your reaction to it, Gerard? Are they right to want taxes to be cut, and is the Chancellor wrong?
Well, good morning. It's great to be on the show. Well, in terms of tax cuts, it's amazing how in this debate taxes always come centre stage, whereas the reality is that taxes have to be seen in the context of the overall economy, and it depends on economic condition. For instance, last autumn, the Chancellor raised taxes. It's like putting the foot on the brake in the car. Now there's the calls for him to cut taxes by many people. That's like putting the foot on the accelerator. But whether you put the foot on the brake or the accelerator depends on overall conditions. I would agree, as indeed the Chancellor did, with the idea that taxes do need to come down, but it's about what you do at the moment. The room for manoeuvre is probably limited. So coming back to your question, is it the thing that he should be doing immediately? Probably not. But the point is that taxes do need to start to be reduced. But when we talk about the economy, taxes are just one lever. Taxes need to be seen within the context of overall economic conditions. So coming back to your question, as I say, I wouldn't agree with the idea that taxes need to go up. Taxes are already very high. Whether this is the time to cut taxes, I think it's more a case that you need to stabilise the economy. But as he also touched on, it's about reducing inflation as well.
Can we talk about corporation tax? Because Jacob Rees-Mogg has just come on and he's questioning whether that is the tax to put up come March when he gives the budget. I mean, I know there's a huge debate about this and people talk about the Laffer curve, and when corporation tax was cut, the receipts seemed to go up. Also, in this post-Brexit environment, we're meant to be being more competitive against the likes of Germany and France that are famed for their high corporation tax rates. Is it a mistake shaving another 6% off already fragile post-COVID profits for business?
OK. Last autumn, there was pressure to raise taxes. Two tax increases that I didn't think were justified with national insurance. The market and economists agreed. The other tax increase that is now about to be implemented is corporation tax going up. Now, the challenge with it is this. When corporation tax was reduced from 25 to 19%, the tax base was widened.
Yes. Now
the corporation tax rate is going up on that wider tax base. So it's hitting business costs, business competitiveness very hard. What many are calling for instance, the Confederation of British Industry, and I would agree with them, is that, OK, if you're putting corporation tax up, that's not great, but don't take away all the other allowances as well. And that's also happening and is not receiving enough attention. So if you put the corporation tax rate up, and the Chancellor would say he has to, I would disagree. What you then should argue for, in my view, is to actually make sure the allowances that were there before remain in place, the so-called super deductor, to encourage firms to invest. Now, the important thing is that we do need to look at taxes in the context of the economy overall. The way I would describe the economy at the moment is the good, the bad and the uncertain.
Right.
The good is that inflation, although it's very high, is set to come down sharply this year, and that will help the economy in the second half of the year. The bad is that the economy is currently very fragile, very weak, very vulnerable, and is not going to have much growth, if any at all, in the first half of the year. The uncertain is where inflation comes down to. Another uncertainty is what the Bank of England does, and they meet this week to decide on interest rates.
What should they do?
My view is they should leave rates unchanged. If interest rates are 3.5%. The economy is already slowing or weak. Inflation has peaked and is set to fall. Previous rate hikes are set to feed through, and the Bank of England is already going to be tightening anyway through reversing quantitative easing, that is, taking money, liquidity out of the economy. But because the Bank of England got it so wrong 2 years ago, they feel that they need to prove their toughness. So the likelihood is that they will probably still raise rates. Interest rates are 3.5%. I think they should stay there, pause there, plateau there, not peak there. But the bank might well raise rates this week to 3.75% or to 4%. So unfortunately, if you're borrowing, if you're leveraged, interest rates are going to go higher. But the point is that the economy faces many challenges at the moment. And coming back to your broader question about tax cuts, that's part of the issue. But my personal view is that while I favoured the idea of lower taxes, I don't think that's the centre stage issue at the moment. And I heard the Chancellor speak on Friday afternoon as well. He was speaking at an event I was attending, the Anglo-British-French event. And he was talking there about all the E's, employment,
yes,
enterprise,
everywhere.
Everywhere. The thing is, it was more a statement of intent.
Yeah.
What we're talking about here is that actions are needed. And I would say that this is probably the best way to view this is the run up to the budget in mid-March. And we do need to see actions. A plan for growth is really necessary. Some
substance over perhaps some of the sound bites. You just mentioned the Bank of England there. I mean, there are mixed views on this. I know you also provided some economic advice to Liz Truss while she was briefly Prime Minister. I mean, who really shafted homeowners when it came to interest rates? Was it Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey, or was it Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng?
OK, well, I only saw her twice before she became Prime Minister.
And I know you warned against unfunded tax cuts.
Yeah, once she went into Downing Street, unfortunately, I didn't see her again. The markets were then...
She could have done with seeing you probably, Gerard.
Yeah, but in answer to your question is a very valid point. The markets were in a very febrile state then. And part of the reason the markets were in a very febrile state then back in the autumn was because they were very worried about inflation. And part of the blame there does, coming back to your question, lie with the Bank of England. The Chancellor then and the Prime Minister then should have been mindful of that and should have taken on board what the markets are saying. And it comes back to Jeremy Hunt at the beginning. If you look at who does he need to keep on side, there's naturally the general public, there's business, hence you asked about corporation tax, and there's also the financial markets. I think he still is, I won't say overly worrying about the financial markets. Markets are now very stable, but we need to move on from that. You could argue that, OK, he's established his credibility in the eyes of the market. What we now need to see in the next few weeks in the run-up to the budget is more real skin on the bone about a plan for growth, and that will address the concerns of the general public and business community.
I just need to break in just for a second, Gerard. Sorry, just because obviously we're on a live news programme. There's some breaking news from Nazim Zahawi. He's written a letter to the Prime Minister where he's thanked him for his kind words. I arrived in this country fearing persecution and speaking no English. He said that he made his business here, he made his life here. I am concerned about the conduct from some of the Fourth Estate in recent weeks. In a week when the Member of Parliament was physically assaulted, I failed to see how one headline on this issue, the news titans, reflect legitimate scrutiny in public officials. I'm sorry to my family the toll this has taken on them. A very personal letter from Nazim Zahawi in response to having been sacked this morning by the Prime Minister. Did you ever had any dealings with Nazim Zahawi?
Oh, well, I met him when he was Chancellor.
Yes.
So I indeed meet all the Chancellors, but I didn't really have any dealings with him.
Do you think on this issue, sometimes it's interesting you say about Jeremy Hunt, you know, in business, do politicians always understand economics adequately? I say that because we've got a businessman here who's obviously made multi-million pounds, and yet the politics of what's happened with his tax affairs has been deeply damaging, so damaging it's cost him his job. We had Jeremy Hunt when he gave his previous autumn statement describing, for instance, dividends received by company bosses as unearned income. That suggests to me that sometimes politicians can be a little bit economically illiterate. Is that a fair comment?
Well, it would be wrong to generalise completely, but I think you're right about the need to really understand not only the policies, but also how they implement people and firms. But often it's about the explanation and the execution of the issues of the policies. But in terms of whoever they are, the real issue is this. Coming back from the individual, since 2008, the UK economy has become a low-growth economy. The event I was at on Thursday, Friday and Saturday, we tend to think here in the UK all these issues are just us. The French I was speaking to were saying how the French economy is in deep trouble. In fact, people were saying coming from Paris to London is like coming from a third world city to a first world city. We tend to think everything is terrible here. The real unfortunate issue is this, that in Western Europe, the major economies are in the same boat. That doesn't make it easy for whoever is in power here in the UK at the moment. But we have to address up to these issues, and therefore we can't solve it overnight. That's the challenge.
Although it's interesting, there isn't much government pushback, for instance, against the likes of Mark Carney, former Bank of England governor, who is often quite willing to stand up and start criticising the UK, I notice, in the press.
Yeah.
And he says that the UK is in the most difficult position of the major economies, full stop. You're saying that, no, the picture isn't good across Europe.
Yeah, well, Mark Carney often talks about this in the context of Brexit. The reality is that the issues challenging the UK economy predate Brexit, and their solution is not going to be solved by going back, for instance, into the EU. Now, some people say that Brexit has made them worse. I would disagree. Certainly the political crisis from 2016 to 2019 didn't help and has framed the debate. But at the same time, the government really needs to follow through. Brexit itself was an event. How we address it in terms of economic and financial terms is a process. So it's not just leaving, it's what you do. So coming back to Mark Carney's question, it's a challenge facing not just the Western world, but Western Europe in particular. What we see, the markets at the moment are more optimistic about the global economy. That's partly because America's likely to have a soft landing. China is now opening up. When you actually look at the world economy, the Western Europe at the moment, when we joined the EU, for instance, back in 1973, it accounted for 26% of the world economy. Now, Western Europe, the major economies, are about 20% of the world economy. Pretty important still.
Yes.
But in 25 years' time, Western Europe, whether you agree with the EU or not, is going to be about 10% of the world economy. India is going to be a bigger economy. That's the reality where we are. And coming back to Carney's point, the challenge is that in Western Europe, especially with ageing populations, we are not achieving the economic growth that we need to achieve. That's why we need to have sensible growth policies. Taxes are part of this, but we shouldn't always make tax the most important issue. Fundamental issues, we need to be investing more. Hence your question, though, about corporation tax is important. Businesses need to be encouraged to invest. They need to be investing and keeping jobs. And of course, the general public need to see inflation being brought down by a Bank of England that gets on top of the problem.
That's two people this morning who have basically said, scrap the corporation tax rise. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Gerard Lyons, thanks for joining me this morning.